Our next presenter is Dr. Lisa Ann Kaplan. She is an associate professor of the biological sciences, and she will be discussing the topic of ecology today.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here to answer a question that I had, which is what happens when something new, like a lionfish, moves to the neighborhood? Human beings are pretty curious. We like to make observations, we like to ask questions, and we do this so that we can learn to understand ourselves and our place in the universe. That's a very natural thing to do. How do I come by the answers to the questions that I pose? Well, there's two ways. I can look at a scientific perspective using the scientific method, which may make some people kind of cringe, or I can look at a non-scientific perspective utilizing critical thinking, logic, and reflection. The reality is, as a biologist, I use both. It's not just one. What kind of questions do I ask? Well, it depends on where I am and what I'm doing. Right now, I'm looking at organismal connections. That's the thing that I'm most excited about. And so when I think about organismal connections, the first thing I think of is something pretty simple, which is a food chain. This is a link among creatures that depend on each other for food. And the beauty of a food chain is it's nice and linear sequential. That's simple for me. I like that. And so everything depends on plants. You have a whole bunch of animals, no matter what these are, that are going to eat plants. They're called herbivores. Then you have other animals that eat them. Those are called carnivores. And then eventually you get to this top dog or top cat in this case, which is the top carnivore. That's the food for no one. Okay, and that's kind of the place to be if you ask me. You can take food chains and link them together into something far more complicated, and that's called a food web. And if you look at this, it sort of looks like a giant mess. There's lots of interconnections. I happen to think this mess looks pretty cool. If you want to simplify it, though, what you can see is that you still have everything depending on plants. No matter what the connections are, you still have your herbivores or your primary consumers. You have things that eat them. Those are the carnivores. And up at the top, you still have your top carnivores, the things that are food for no one. So with all of that complexity and all of that interconnection, you have to kind of, well, you don't have to, but I do. I kind of ask myself, does one change actually make a difference? And the answer that I think is the right answer is yes. And to prove that I think that my answer yes is correct, I'm going to offer you this introduction of exotic species as an example. So what's an exotic species? The term exotic doesn't actually apply to any one individual. Instead, it applies to somebody being in a neighborhood they're not supposed to be in. For example, a black mamba is perfectly reasonable to find in a neighborhood in Kenya. You don't want to find it, but you can find it there. That's normal. It is not at all normal to find that in Connecticut. So this exotic or non-native species is someplace it's not supposed to be. The problem with non-native species is that they cause or are likely to cause harm on a multitude of levels, including economic, environmental, or human health. The ones that are particularly nasty, the ones that are capable of quite a bit of damage, we use the term invasive with those. These are the ones that are the most aggressive because they grow and reproduce rapidly and they cause a significant amount of disturbance. Is every exotic species that gets introduced into an area something that's going to be invasive? The answer actually is no, hardly any of them are. It's not a huge number. So why is that such a big deal? Because it's nearly impossible to predict which ones are going to be invasive and which ones aren't. That's not because we're not good at what we do or not because we're not interested. It's because many invasive species go through something called a lag phase. And this lag phase is going to do one of two things. It's either going to be a time period when you don't even notice they're there, but as they gain traction in the environment, all of a sudden, boom, you have a population explosion, and by then it's too late. If they're not doing that, then it's more insidious. They're creeping and crawling into an environment, and they're displacing the creatures who are supposed to be there. And until you have a crash, you don't even know that's happening. So that's why they're particularly difficult and hard to predict. So some might say, well, that's just nature, so it's no big deal, right? What's the big deal? It's one creature replacing another. Well, so that you see the impact of these exotic species, 50% of the organisms that are currently listed as either threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act of the United States are there because of exotic species. They're not there because of human behavior per se, they're there because of introduction of exotic species, which one could argue is a human problem. If you don't particularly care about animals, you're not an outdoor kind of person and you don't care about that, the other reason that you might want to care is because invasive exotic species cause a huge economic loss in the United States, approximately $120 billion per year. This is because of damage, loss, repair, or efforts to control. So they are a major pain. Okay, this is a huge problem, so one change can actually make a big difference. So with that background, I want to offer for you the lionfish case study, which could alternately be titled The Reason Why I Like to Scuba Dive. Okay, and so we're going to talk about lionfish real quick. What is a lionfish? A lionfish is a beautiful fish that happens to be native to the Indo-Pacific region. They're gorgeous. They're there. Trumpetfish eat them. They're held down to a low level. It's a great fish to have. They are bright, they are beautiful, but the problem with them is several-fold. They have little glands at the base of these spines that squirt out a venom when they sting you, and the effects of the venom last for days. It can cause extreme pain, respiratory distress, and paralysis. That works great for the lionfish if what it's stinging is a predator or is a potential food item. It doesn't work great if you're a scuba diver and getting stung by one. The other thing about lionfish is that they spawn several times a month all year long, which is really different than fish here, which only spawn for several months a year. So they have this very prolific capability of making tons of baby lionfish in a very short period of time. But the lionfish is actually more than just a pretty fish. In fact, it's a voracious predator. Anything that fits in this mouth will go in this mouth. And if you can tell, it actually has rings of teeth that go all the way back towards this little hole, which is the back of its throat, and it gets stuffed down there. Once you're in the mouth, if you fit in there, you are not coming out. And so what we find out is that lionfish are going to eat commercially important fish that we like to eat, so they are competing for our food source. We also find out that they eat the food that other fish need to eat, and they are responsible for one of the greatest reduction in reef fishes and coral reefs in the Caribbean that has been seen in recent times, this one fish. And so why is that? Well, they've invaded. And so what happened is they were initially dumped off the coast of Florida, and nobody worried because there's a Florida current and they would all stay there and it would be Florida's problem. Then hurricanes came and flopped the fish over the current and got them into the Caribbean. But that's no big deal because that's really not our problem. They destroyed the reefs in this area, again, not our problem. Then they started creeping their way north, which they should not do because they like warm water, so that shouldn't have been a problem. They have now invaded all of the Carolinas, and within the last 18 months, they are now up by New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. That is now our problem. Okay, so even if you thought it wasn't before, it is now. The reason is because just north of here, over in this area where I'm flashing the screen light, that's Georges Bank. That's a major fisheries industry, and that's already been hard hit from overfishing. So now you introduce lionfish to the area who are gobbling up all your baby fish, and you have a huge problem with the way of life for the fishermen and the industries in this area, and you are now going to have a problem with the other fish. So this is quite a bit of a problem now. So can the tide be turned? Can we actually win a war, since we like to have wars apparently on everything? Can we win a war on lionfish? And I am here proudly to tell you as a biologist, the answer is no. Okay, not gonna happen. The reason it's not gonna happen is because they are making baby lionfish all the time. So what can we do? Give up? No, that's not good either. Instead, what we can do is we can try to control, because that really is our only option. All right? Now, one of the things that we could do is try to remove the lionfish by going down and catching them. It would take all the armies of the world to be underwater all the time to catch them, and then they'd just make more. You let one or two go, and you've got them repopulated again. So that's not a really good option. We can encourage human consumption because people like to eat fish. I actually learned how to spear them and fillet them and cook them. They taste lovely. And so a lot of people are starting to eat them in the Caribbean. They're in the finest of restaurants. And so as long as you know what you're doing, it's not quite a bad thing. But as a biologist, the thing that I was most excited about was thinking about biological control. And so for biological control of lionfish, I went back to thinking about what I learned when I was a freshman in college, which is that whole food chain, food web thing. I said, well, wouldn't it just be lovely if we could find predators in the Caribbean? Well, unfortunately, the predators that are in the Indo-Pacific region don't like the Caribbean and don't want to live there. So we have to find ones who live there. So then I thought to myself, okay, who would eat a lionfish? Would it be a triggerfish? What about a shark? They almost eat everything, I think. And what about barracuda? They're supposed to be mean. So part of my study is I went down and I tried it. And triggerfish will not eat lionfish, no matter what you do. You can cut them up for them, you can present them, they won't eat it. Sharks won't eat them the 2 times I tried, and then I chickened out because I got scared. I really wasn't quite brave about taking risks. I don't like feeding sharks underwater, and so I stopped that. So maybe sharks will eat it, but I got too scared to find out. Barracuda, they won't eat it either. In fact, they will go around you and ignore you and just do everything to stay away from the lionfish. So then I thought, what about eels? I hadn't considered them at first, but I thought, what the heck? Eels may be potential predators. They're big enough. They have sharp teeth. They like to eat fish. I thought, why not try them? So I made friends with several eels. These are the 3 best ones. They were the most photogenic. They tend to stay in one spot within 10 meters, so you can find them almost every day. So you have to go down and find them for a couple weeks. And then you have to go tempt them with food, and then you have to see if they'll eat the food. And so the whole idea was to get them to see that lionfish could be potential prey items for them because they're a top predator, so we would try that. And so the success story is as follows. I have a video for you for the first time shown anywhere. Ready? So what you are seeing right now is 2 eels, which is very atypical. A spotted eel is on your left, and the green or the golden eel is on your right. The golden eel is the most hungry. He's engaging in this like figure 8 thing. What this allows is increased torque and torsion for his mouth parts, so he's getting that lionfish, who we provided for him. I speared him and killed him and then gave him that. The spotted eel, he's coming in now, and he's thinking, what the heck? I want some. So he rips a piece off. It tastes pretty good. And then what you'll see is he comes back for more. And he engages in a classic behavior, which is a full body spin. There it is. See it? So these are natural feeding behaviors, which I'm pretty excited about. And then the spotted eel takes it. And the other one goes after it. Now this is the big boy. I nicknamed him Fred. He's eaten several times, and watch what happens. This is a live lionfish, by the way. He's just been a little stunned. Poof. So clearly you can teach eels that lionfish are a reasonable food choice, and they will actually eat them, and they'll eat them on their own. So I was pretty happy with the last eel. The first 2 were only about 2.5 to 3 feet. The last one was about 4.5, 5 feet. He's a lot bigger and older. And so he was very careful. You saw how slow he went? He was going behind the spines that had the venom in it. So it was very exciting to see him learn that. A typical day when you're in the field, at least during the daytime, you spend very little time in the air and a lot of time underwater, and then you spend hours at night loading everything into the computer. So it's not a very glorious thing. This part's fun, though. And on unusual days, you have people who are learning how to spear, and you see where the spear is? They missed the lionfish and hit me, which was like 2 inches from my foot. That was not too cool. And then on other days, I'm chased out of the water. That's like a 3.5-foot barracuda. There's his little head, there's his little tail. And he actually, I got so scared. He chased me right out of the water, and then he came like really shallow. So you do have to take risks. You do have to be a little brave. And you do have to have a nice team who will bail you out when you're in big trouble. And so I had a huge team here of people to help. And Quinnipiac University actually funded part of this study while I was on my sabbatical, so they were helpful in that respect too. So in all, introduction of exotic species is a problem. We do need to tend to it. It can cost us a lot of time, money, and precious things. And probably the best thing to do is to not introduce them to begin with. So be a little bit more aware when you go places and want to bring things home just because they look cool in your fish tank. And that's it. Thank you.